so enjoying it since I started. And then in my own playing capacity, I play hurling and football with Confi GA. We be a senior club in hurling and football in Kildare, and I play with the Kildare senior hurlers as well. So that's a very brief outline of myself. Kieran, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, how's everyone doing this evening? I'm Kieran Sloan, Performance GDA with Loud GA. Previously I've worked with Ulster Rugby, down senior footballers and Cross McGlen. Tonight we're just presenting on the demands of Gaelic football and different strategies myself and Paul would use when trying to get peak performance from our team. You want to take it off there, Paul?
Yeah, cool. Right, as you say, guys, this is it's an unusual. Well, first of all, I hope everyone's keeping well, and on these strange times, you're getting through it as best you can. It's great to see the numbers are registered, and I suppose this evening is geared more towards when we get back to normality, as opposed to how you deal with this period of time. So we're going to treat it more in the case of what we'd look for you to do in pre-season, in-season, and off-season of a general season program. However, if you do have any comments about this particular time and about conditioning players or anything like that, we'll have a good stab at answering the questions for you. In relation to what we're going to cover this evening, we're looking at the physical demands of Gaelic football. So what are we actually training for? And then we're going to nearly look at it as this is the various tools we can use to condition the players through various interval methods, and then last piecing it all together and showing you what it'd look like in a planning and programming capacity. In relation to the physical demands, we are going to keep it quite broad. We're not like you could get bogged down a rabbit hole and going into the physical demands. We're going to keep it quite general, give you some stats, what we've pulled from some scientific papers. And if there's any questions or if that doesn't match up with yourselves, pop in the question and we'll try to delve in a little bit further into it. Again, in the conditioning and interval methods, we're going to keep it very practical, so you should be able to come away with some useful information that you can actually apply, as opposed to keeping it very principle orientated where you're saying that was great but where do we go with it. And then finally, again, planning and programming, it's very much what we're experiencing and what we're delivering in the counties, so you should be able to come away with some very practical info from it. And as you said, it's going to be fairly informal. I'll be interrupting Kieran, he'll be interrupting me, and if anyone has any questions throughout it, feel free to football can be described as an invasion field sport which requires the players to perform repeated unpredictable bouts of high intensity exercise interspersed with light to moderate activity in response to patterns of play. So I robbed that from one of the assignments I was doing in college before, but it is a very general description of what happens in Gaelic football. If we actually talk about the numbers that we're looking at in the sport, so the first graph, the first chart on the left is positional total distance. Okay, so from fullbacks, midfield across the full forwards, you're looking at somewhere between 7.5 kilometers covered in the fullback and full forward line, out to around 9.5 kilometers covered in midfield. So these are pretty impressive numbers. Okay, so from that you'd be encouraged to think that we need a very strong aerobic base. However, when we think about that and actually break it down further into actually what are the movement activities of Gaelic football, we get a far more detailed insight into it. So what we see here is that on the right hand side we have percentages of movements. Okay, so in that what we have is 12 or so percent is backpedaling, 17% of it is being stationary, and we've a very high percentage of walking, up to 40%, jogging's another 14 or 18%, and then the top two are probably the most important ones and the ones that we're most interested in, which would be running and game related. So that'd be tackling, accelerations, decelerations, and the likes of that. So if we think about it in how the game unfolds, all this stuff we need covers maybe 60-70% of total distance, so we need to be able to cover that distance, but it all happens in a fairly low aerobic capacity. Important area, the running and the sprinting, game related activity, that's what we want to concentrate our attention on and make sure that the players are able to perform in these situations that are so important to success on the pitch. We're looking at the top two, the running and the game related activity. Okay, these are the numbers here on the left hand side that myself and Kieran will be very interested in. Okay, so what we have here is a graph on the positional demands of high speed running and very high speed running. Okay, so this is where a player is running at a speed for high speed of over 70 kilometers an hour, and very high speed running will be any runs that are over 22 kilometers an hour. Okay, so in that again, we're seeing that players are generally covering a full forward, full back is in around 1,200 meters for high speed running. So 1,200 meters of over 17 kilometers an hour. And out around midfield, they're getting up to nearly two kilometers of high speed running. And then they're all in around 350 to 500 meters of very high speed running. Okay, and then that's backed up, and that's how that's made up, and it kind of gives a further breakdown. If we see what these numbers of high speed and very high speed numbers are made up of, it would be a multitude of accelerations and sprints. So what we'd have is players are performing anywhere from 150 to 230 sprints, depending on acceleration. Depending on position, and sprints are anywhere from 35 to 56 sprints are occurring in a game. And then lastly, the bottom right graph, that's giving us just an idea of the peak velocity that players position-wise are reaching in the games. Okay, so what really this is painting the picture for us is that players are performing some very high intense activities interspersed with low aerobic activity through walking, jogging, and the likes of that. Do you want to add there, Kieran?
Yeah, I suppose kind of a lot of questions I get asked: how much interval running should we do in a session? How much do we need to do? And I suppose using these, especially the total high speed running meters, this can be your target. So if a midfielder is covering 2,000 high speed meters, that should be your baseline of what you want to get when you're planning your conditioning session. Okay, so if that's your 100%, you obviously want to go a wee bit higher to get adaptation in the player. So this is kind of used as a guideline. High speed running meters, you could also refer to as your conditioning meters. That's what you're kind of aiming for and above when conditioning your team. And then on the speed side of it, it's quite important to give the players that exposure to speed. Okay, you can see 8.7 the midfielder hit usually in training, or if you're doing speed or kind of any big pitch activities in training, you usually will hit a higher speed number than what you will in the game. So it's just important that you're conditioning both sides of the spectrum, your speed and your conditioning meters, your high speed running meters.
There's a question there, sorry, Paul. Are these data figures coming from inter-county or club football?
Yeah, these ones are particularly from inter-county. So this is a paper by Malone, 2017, with the references there at the end. There is club data out there, and we'll share those papers as well. I suppose just the point that I was going to add to there is, I suppose we've quite a mix of players. Obviously, the 60-minute game is going to probably reduce these numbers in total capacity, but it probably won't change the actual peak velocity or the speed that the players are going to run at. And then I suppose the other one that myself and Kieran were talking about, we're not all in the position having the luxury of having GPS and being able to track exactly what players are achieving. But when we go further into the program, by actually knowing what they should be achieving through looking at the research papers, we're able to set up the intervals that will actually create that situation to occur, even if we don't have GPSs on their backs. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Slide is really painting the picture of what those last graphs are telling us. All right. So what this is a GPS profile of a player who performed in a match in the National Football League this year. He was a half-back. He covered 9,136 meters, and they won that day, so they were successful that day. We've two boxes spelled out, so we've a yellow box and a red box. The yellow box indicates high-speed running, so everything over 17 kilometers an hour, and the red box indicates very high-speed running. So every time the line goes into either of these boxes, that'll be classified as meters that they are covering in that last graph that's telling us that they did high speed running, very high speed running. So in that, each of these lines and these squiggles, that's telling us the velocity that the player is moving at. So if you take, he's reaching high speed, then he's coming down, he's jogging, backtracking, side shuffling, pedaling, and then he has another activity where he has to get right up into the very high speed running, and then he comes back down and he has another break. And then if you analyze this, we'll give you the slideshow, you can see that if we count them, I think there's 28 very high speed runs in this game. Now the thing is that they're not happening at a set time in the game, so they can happen any time across the game. 2 or 3 could happen together. So we have to take this into context and this into our planning as well, that the players have to be able to perform at these very high speeds that are required to be successful, but they also have to be able to repeat these in the situation as the match requires them to occur. And then if we think about what's happening and we justify why it's important to be good in these speeds and get the players really fast, when we think about when very high speed activity occurs, it's in very important parts of the game. So it's a break in the line to get in and have a shot on a score. It's a track back to intercept and create a block. So they're key activities in the game that require these speeds to occur. Whereas the general lower stuff is kind of marking your man and following play and the likes of that, and positioning and stuff like that. So that's why we place a huge importance on these very high speed and very high speed numbers.
Yeah, just for me to add, just regarding we flip back to that, Paul, can you?
Column.
Yeah, just for anyone who may have the luxury of GPS, obviously you can set your own metrics. We just went with 4.7 and 6.1 here as per the research paper with Malone. You could bump the high speed running up to a 5.5 meters per second, and then your very high speed running that wee bit higher. But it is just important to give players exposure to that speed. As Paul touched on, it's most likely going to have an effect on the outcome of the game. So you have to give players exposures to this speed, and again look at how many efforts a player can repeat for a set duration. So again, a metric we would look at is repeated efforts. So inside a minute, how many efforts above a set pace players can hit. As we found, this kind of has a greater outcome on performance or influence in the game. So yeah.
Okay, and this is Mladen Jovanovic. He's written a couple of papers on high intensity interval training, and he's a bit of a guru in this section. But his statement here really spells out exactly what we're looking to do in relation to conditioning. So it's increase the intensity, the sustainability, and the frequency of these high intensity efforts. So it's self-explanatory. We want to increase the speed the players can move at. We want to make sure that they can sustain these high intensity movements throughout a game, and the more efforts that they complete and be able to deal with the demands of the game is we're going to refer to this as a metric that we use in relation to speed that we're looking for players to, or intensity we're looking for players to perform at in training. Okay, so what maximum aerobic speed? I'd say a lot of us have heard of it. It's became quite popular in recent times, but just for anyone who hasn't, the maximum aerobic speed is designed to assess the minimum speed that elicits VO2 max. So what that means is it's the speed that a person is using their maximum aerobic capacity, or their aerobic system is still the main energy source for the player. Okay. After that, if we go even higher than that, we're moving into our anaerobic system, and we're getting into the science side there. So just from that point of view, we're using it as a metric to prescribe conditioning protocols, so it's an intensity metric. And what we found is that the amount of time that they can spend above 100% of your maximum aerobic speed it seems to be a critical factor for improving aerobic power or increasing your aerobic capacity.
There's a question there, Paul. What's the typical distance for high-speed bursts? Thank you.
What speed they would need to hit or get over for it to go in as high speed running?
I think it's more what's the distance, what's the typical distance that to be covering in high speed runs.
If they hold the pace for longer than a second, they will kind of classify into that, and then any speed above 4.7 in this or in that research article. So any distance above 4.7 would go in as high speed, but you got to hold it for a second.
Yeah, and then in relation to distance, they found out that they rarely go over 30 meters would be the maximum. But from that, we must be aware, if we're going back to that graph paper which shown the GPS metrics, it's 30 meters in that zone will be the maximum that we're really seeing ever. It's not 30 meters from 0 up to 27 or whatever speed they get to. So it's but generally it's somewhere below the 20 to 30 meters is the distance that they cover. Will be the highest number that we'd see.
Okay, very good.
So in relation to the maximum aerobic speed, we've various ways of testing aerobic capacity tests. Okay, so these are just references. So we've time trial variations, the 1.2 kilometer test or the Bronco test, or else we can have intermittent style tests like the yo-yo or the 30-15. So these are all various protocols. And we can send through details on them as well. We're going to describe or give a small bit of detail on the 1.2k as a method of measuring maximum aerobic speed. If you roll on to the next slide there, Colin. Okay, so this would be the 1.2 kilometer time trial. Okay, so what we'd be looking for, generally we're looking, the fitter the team is, myself and Kieran had a little bit of a discussion on this. I was leaning more towards the 1400 meter with the intercounty teams, and he was leaning more towards the 1200 meters. But we're looking for them to be performing for at least 4 minutes to classify it as maximum aerobic speed. But so perform a running trial that the players will complete in somewhere between 4 to 6 minutes. 1200 or 1400 meters is an ideal distance. This is a maximal effort, so the players are going as hard as they can. What we're going to do is record the time and transfer it into seconds. So 4 minutes 20 seconds would be 260 or 4 minutes and 20 seconds is 260 seconds. And then how we make the equation and how we find out what their 100% maximum aerobic speed is we divide the 260 into the distance that they covered. So in this case, it's 260 into 1200 meters. What we get there is this person's maximum aerobic speed is 4.6 meters per second. So then in a 10 seconds at this pace, we'd be expecting them to cover 46 meters. So this is just an example of how we perform a protocol to figure out the intensity required. It's a set test. The maximum aerobic speed you're going to see later on, we're going to be talking about in relation to we want them moving at 90% of their maximum aerobic speed, or we want them moving at 110%. So it's just an intensity reference point as much as that in here. Okay. I'll hand over to you, Kieran.
Yeah, no, so kind of your 4 different conditioning strategies really are your interval training, your endurance training, your small-sided games, and your mixed approach, which is a combination of all of them, or combining your small-sided games with your individual or with your interval training. Okay, as we go on, we're kind of going to focus more so on the interval training side of things, as well as touching on an element of speed and small-sided games. Okay, Okay, so just going to touch on some of the terminology you're going to see with the examples we have. Okay, so your active recovery is basically moving during your rest. Okay, so you might do skills, you might do small-sided games, or you might have a recovery jog in between your run. Okay, passive recovery is standing still and getting your recovery. Okay, so you might operate for 30 seconds and you stand still for 15 seconds. Intensity is percentage of your maximal aerobic speed. So the examples Paul gave just above. Okay, so your 3 different mechanisms are going to be intensive. So work to rest of 1 to 2. Okay, so you might work for 30 seconds, rest for 60. Okay, your normal 1-to-1 is 30 on, 30 off. And your extensive is 2-to-1 work to rest. Okay, so you may work for 30 seconds and then rest for 15 seconds. Okay, so we're just going to start with our long intervals, okay, where you would put these into your your season would usually be on your players off season or early pre-season, just to try and get your players to build that base and the demands of what's going to come throughout pre-season. Okay, you'd usually gear them towards to be 1 to 4 minutes long, and you can have either active or passive long intervals. Okay, so example, we just went with passive. Okay, so you can see you're working for 2 minutes, resting for 4. Again, your intensity set at 100, 110%. Again, using your maximal aerobic speed prescription that Paul described. Okay, 2 to 4 reps, and you may just spread that out throughout your session. Okay, so you may do a 2-minute run, rest, and go into a small-sided game or a skills element. Okay, your normal is 180 seconds work, 180 seconds rest, so 1 to 1. Okay, intensity would come down a wee bit as they're operating for a wee bit longer. Reps and sets would be similar. Again, dropping them in and out throughout your session. Extensive then, okay, you'd be working for 60 seconds, resting for 30. Okay, so your rest has come down, so the intensity is going to come down a wee bit. Again, you can apply a wee bit more volume into your session as you're only working for, it's only taking 90 seconds of your overall session. So you may put 3 or 4 reps in a set and do this 3 or 4 times throughout your session, again, with your football in between. Yeah.
Okay. And in that, just the reason we use time as the indicator of what we want them to do as opposed to distance is to ensure that all players are performing at the same intensity. Okay, so if we go for distance, so say we set it at, we want them to cover 500 meters or 400 meters, that'll be very achievable for the fitter players and harder for the unfit players. So when we set it at distance that everyone's working for a set amount of time, everyone's been challenged to the requirement or the intensity that they require. Yeah.
This next slide is basically just a practical example of a long interval session. Okay, pretty basic, easy setup. Okay, it's a continuous 4-minute run. Measure out 100 meters on the pitch. You may have a cone down every 10 meters. Okay, and you're basically seeing how many reps your player can cover. Okay, a nice target I would have would be above 10. Okay, by the end of your long interval kind of block in pre-season, you're hoping to get them up to 12 reps, maybe 13. Okay, so you may do 3 or 4 of these reps throughout your session. But again, just measure out your 100 meters and it's just a continuous 4-minute run. Okay, so over 1 kilometer is what we're looking for them to get. Yep. Okay, so next one is on your short intervals and your tempos, probably the most used intervals across the season. Okay, you would put them in place kind of mid to late pre-season and then throughout your in-season. Okay, you're operating your duration between 0 and 60 seconds, intensity 100 to 130% of your maximal aerobic speed, 140 if you're doing a tempo method. Okay, again, you can see your work to rest. Okay, 15 seconds work, 30 seconds rest, and you can see your intensity is a lot greater than what you were having in your long intervals. Okay, so 130%. You may do 4 to 8 minutes of a block, 2 to 4 sets. Okay, predominantly you will rest standing still during these reps. Okay, your normal would be 15 on, 15 off. Again, 4 to 8 minutes block, 2 to 4 sets, and something similar with your extensive. Again, 30 seconds work, 15 seconds rest at an intensity of 110%. Again, a 4 to 8 minute block, 2 to 4 sets. Okay, when you're setting them out, you might start with 4 minutes for 2 weeks. Week 3, you move to 5 minutes. Week 4 to 6 minutes, and so on. Okay, your tempo then. Okay, your focus of your tempos is trying to accumulate as much high-speed running as possible. Okay, so you should be operating at a higher speed and intensity than what you'll be getting in your short intervals. Okay, so you're working for 20 seconds. Okay, you should be getting up to 6, 7, slightly over 7 meters per second, resting for 60. So loads of rest to try and eliminate fatigue so you can go and accumulate a lot of high-speed running. Okay, we just flick to the next slide. Show a few examples. Okay, so in this set here, this is a short interval example. Okay, so from our fitness test, we've put the players into 3 groups. Okay, one group is 80 meters, one group's 85 meters, and your third group's 90 meters. Okay, so the players are operating for 15 seconds when they hit the cone, they stand and rest for 15 seconds before they go again. Okay, so again, you can move the players quite freely up and down the groups. If someone has had a bad fitness test and he's in the 80-meter group and you're looking at him and he's finding it too easy, you could bump him up to the 85-meter, or you're looking to bump him up to the 90-meter group. Okay, reason I quite like this is because players are looking and going, I need to get fitter. They're looking at players maybe in the same position in a higher group, and they're getting worried, and they kind of work that wee bit harder to try and move up the groups. Okay, and then the next example is just the tempo example. Okay, again, 120 meters, as fast as you can to cover, so 20 seconds to cover your 120 meters. Okay, if you get in at 16, 17 seconds, all the better. Again, plenty of rest, and your focus is gathering up that high speed running meters. Okay, Paul, you want to touch on tempos?
Yeah, I suppose I'm very attracted to these at the moment. I'm trying them out with a few teams that I'm with and stuff like that. And I suppose it is that case when we come back to the demands of the game, we're seeing that this ability to cover those high speed meters and get the players comfortable with turning the legs over and getting that max velocity or getting that high intensity work done is of huge benefit. And because they're working that bit harder, they're improving their aerobic system as well. And how we don't kill them is we extend the rest period, so that kind of by increasing the rest period we're able to let them run faster, but we have to ensure that they get that rest. And just as well in relation to it, because we see it a lot of us go to the normal short interval training as Kieran referenced there, and that's our go-to with training. It would just be one bit of warning that don't underestimate the value of the long interval training. That really sets the base for the players to be able to utilize the adaptation that occurs in the short interval training. If we go too early with the short interval training, the players kind of nearly hit a ceiling and they plateau and they never get over it. Whereas if we spend that bit of time at the start of the season focusing on the long interval training at that lower intensity for a longer duration, it gives them a far stronger base that allows them progress further with the short interval training further into the season.
Just to add to that, it's kind of quite important that when you set your pre-season start date, that you try and get the players out 2 weeks beforehand to start. Some players will do it, some players won't, but it's important to get them out 2 or 3 weeks before pre-season to have a small base before intensity ramps up amongst the group. Okay, and I suppose it applies to the current situation we're in now. It's trying to get the players out to do a minimum amount of work possible, okay, so that when we do come back, we may only have 4 weeks to prepare for a league or a championship game, that there is a level of work in the players, and then we can bring the intensity up as naturally will happen when a squad comes together.
I have a question for you here, lads. Will the tempo session last up to 13 minutes and 20 seconds long?
Yeah, so in that each rep in that scenario or that setting will take 80 seconds. I suppose there is various methods we can introduce there as well if we are concerned over over the lads standing around or we have a certain amount of time for the training session. So tempo is one of those activities where we can introduce a skill element or an activity in the rest period, obviously being aware or just being acknowledging that we can't push them too hard in that period because we want them to be fairly recovered for the next high intensity interval. I suppose when we are using them, because it is probably, I'm finding it quite hard I can get short interval trainings 15 on, 15 off. I can get 12 reps in 6 minutes, whereas tempo's taking me nearly twice as long. However, the next part of training is really strong when we use the tempo, where sometimes if the players aren't conditioned enough, if we try to do a small sided game or a skills activity after a block of short interval training, the players can be that bit fatigued that you'd actually question what are you getting out of the next phase of training. And that'd be my own experience. Would you have anything to add, Kieran?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I suppose on your rest, it is an opportunity to kind of work on your skill levels that won't overly tax the body. And again, it kind of re-emphasizes the players' running mechanics, so they're not under fatigue and they're not slogging it. Their shoulder blades aren't up to their ears and they're really forcing it. You're just hoping that you're encouraging the player to stay natural and kind of float over the 120 meters and gather up as much high speed running above that 6.7 meters per second. But no, I agree with it.
The last one on it is the players are really fresh for the gym session or any other activity that they can have in the week as well. So that's another added benefit to the tempos. I'm a pro tempo man here myself, but you find that if we go too hard on the mass and they get a really hard pitch session on the Tuesday, they mightn't be fit for the gym on a Wednesday or Thursday, or even the next session might be a bit fatigued. So tempos, you can get this work in and it doesn't add on the additional fatigue as well. So I use mass training and short interval as well, but these are some of the benefits of tempo.
Okay, so we're going to keep it as Paul said, quite broad, and kind of just we're just going to focus on max speed intervals this evening. Okay, obviously with speed there's a lot of different considerations to have. You've got your agility, your change of direction, your accelerations, decelerations inside your change of direction, and then obviously your max speed. But we're just going to kind of focus on the max speed side of things tonight and just kind of give some base instructions on work to rest and how they can apply it into a session.
Kieran, before we do go on to speed, I think it's a question based on the previous one, so we might just ask it now, is how long would you spend with the skills between sets? So if you go back to your tempo one, and if you had the 2 sets, what would be the ratio between the sets and then the skill work?
Yeah, well, for me, if we were doing a tempo session, I would kind of maybe do a warm-up, and then I would go into a kind of low intensity skills drill, operate into a set of tempos, so 5 reps. You could keep your skills in your rest period, and then it depends on how long you're out on the pitch and what time you have to play with. Obviously, the coach will determine what time he wants to give you. But in between that, then you might have a 10 or 15 minutes of maybe some low intensity skills, but maybe some small sided games, and then back into another block of tempos. For me, I wouldn't personally apply my tempos at the end of the session, because I want to try and accumulate that speed and that high speed running. So I want to have as little fatigue as possible. With your MAS, it would be a wee bit different of a setup. You would have maybe a wee bit more intensity, but Paul did touch on that your skill level may get worse in games after short intervals. Yeah, Paul, have you?
Yeah, no, that'd be similar myself. You could you can treat them like sprinkle in kind of. We're going to go through a session setup at the end of the presentation, but earlier in the session, you could put in your tempo block, maybe a small sided game or some tactical activity that you wanted to do, which could last anywhere from 10 to 15, 20 minutes, whatever you require. And then it could come in. All you'd really require is 5 minutes rest between reps, between sets. But there's no problem extending that out if you have other activity in the session as well.
Very good. There's another question here. At what age groups would you recommend starting mass training?
For me, kind of my real focus on conditioning for underage, it would be 17s up, where I would kind of really start kind of adding in conditioning blocks. I wouldn't have a huge emphasis on it with anything younger than that. I may do a fitness test or an occasional bit of conditioning with the younger groups more, just to see how the players respond, what their effort levels is like. But I wouldn't have a huge focus on anything conditioning with anything below under 17s. Kind of my thing is with your underage player is that you're trying to develop skills, you're trying to develop game awareness, and for me they're the things that are the hardest to develop. So I would kind of really focus my MAS or conditioning methods from 17s up, even 18s up. My main aim underage is to develop football, to improve the players of football, as his condition will develop as he gets older. And young players are doing so much. They're rugby, soccer, Gaelic, they're active so often, probably don't need it as well. That would just be my take on it, Paul.
Yeah, no, same, exact same.
Very good.
Yeah.
Next one, what total volume are you looking at for tempo session alone? Would you prescribe more if players are only doing running session?
So a general guideline would be to look, if we went back to the first numbers we spoke about there, depending on the player. So if you're looking at the full back who's covering of 6 reps of 100 meters, so it's kind of in around that is a good guide to use of what are the players generally covering. Um, so generally the way we'd start, if it's in off season or even at this time, like I'd be prescribing some lads to start around 2 sets of 5 or 6 reps of 100 meters, and then you'd be just conscious of never going over a 10% step increase per week is kind of a general guide I'd like to use. So if we're on 1200, you'd probably add a rep on for the next week, and then and so on and so forth. So it's safer just to slowly add to it, as opposed to if you go too fast too soon, you just increase the risk of injury. That'll be my own view.
Perfect. I've got 2 more questions here on this area, and I think we'll just ask those quickly, and then we better move on to the speed section. Otherwise, so very quickly, I'll give this one to you, Kieran. If your tempo runs are based on percentage of mass, then would a 120-meter run in 20 seconds not be too hard for some of your squad? If so, do you set different lengths for different groups of players?
So some players might be too hard, and some players might need to go a wee bit harder. Again, you would just, if you have the data there from a fitness test, you would just set them into their groups. Okay, with the tempos, if you set out 120 meters and they're coming in at 22 seconds, but they're operating at a good intensity, you're happy with that. The same way on the flip side, if a player's doing 120 meters and comes in at 16, 17 seconds, he's operating at a good pace. So you can group them and give them specific distances, but because it's a speed focus, you're kind of encouraging them to push through to get in at 20 seconds. But if they come in at 22 seconds, you're not going to punish them with giving them another couple of reps. That's how I would do it, but you can set it from the fitness test.
You're looking for good technique as well. Like, you actually want them having a good running stature. Like, you want them to be covering the ground comfortably. If they're really busting a gut, like, and their form looks terrible, they're probably, the distance is set that bit too, or the speed is set that bit too high for them. So in that, because they're getting such a long rest period, if they're coming in at, as Kieran said, at 22 seconds, that's fine if they look like that they have a good running position. Like, so it's not as strict as the 15 on 15 off style where you want them to get in on time, because it's based on they have to go again in 15 seconds again. Tempo is actually a lot more about running posture and covering that ground, because they are covering ground at quite a high speed. Like, and their rest periods are so long, they actually put a lot of effort into each rep, because they're like, oh, I get a good recovery out of this. Like, I'm happy to go hard. Like,
very good. And the last one in this topic, because great questions. Would you advocate mass running every session?
We'll be touching that as we go into how we'd map it out, but it depends on, probably not, no, but it does depend on where you are in your season. If it's a in-season league week, you might have it in your first session of the week, so your high training session. If it's a championship week, probably not. You're hoping that the work's done and you're just gearing everything towards your football, your team play, your tactics. In pre-season, you may have more scope to maybe do 2 MAS sessions, but we will touch on that and how we'd map it out and how we'd lay it out into the session and inside the season.
Okay, thanks, lad.
Yeah, next one, please, Carl. Yeah, so just kind of cover our speed as I touched on. Okay, so we're kind of breaking it into 2, your accelerations, okay, and your max velocity. Both 100% max effort intensity. Now, this is a MAS 100%. This is max effort 100%, as hard as the player can go. Your distance for accelerations is 0 to 30, 0 to 40 max. Okay, for max velocity, you're looking at 30 meters and upwards. Okay. Your start point could be, you could have a 2-point start, which is just a split standing start. Okay. Or you may have a rolling start. Your rest, the kind of a basic guideline that's out there is every 10 meters you cover, and you're looking at 45 to 60 seconds rest. Okay, so some sample sessions out to the 21, as fast as the player can go. Okay, 90 seconds to 2 minutes rest, max effort, 3 to 8 reps in a set, 1 to 3 sets, 3 to 8 reps, 1 to 3 sets in a session. Again, early in the session, your first set of 3 to 8 reps or whatever it may be, may just be 70-80% warm up to lead into your second set after a low activity skills drill. Okay. Your max velocity, then you might open up to the 45, 3 minutes rest, obviously more meters covered, more time needed to recover. Okay, max effort, again, reps 4 to 6, 1 to 2 sets. Again, you may use one of the sets as a warm-up before you lead into your second set, and you may only tell a player to hit 100% if he feels comfortable. Okay, it's important obviously to chat to your players before you get in the pitch if they've anything underlying or may have had previous injuries or depending on where they're at. So it is important when you're training acceleration and max velocity that you do chat to your players and you see where they are, how they're feeling, and what their injury history has been, and just giving them the right exposure to it. And just some samples. Okay, very simple sack setup. Okay, just a cone on the 45, and players need to get there as quickly as possible. You can see what the first rep is, what time they're coming in at, and put a time limit on it. You might be looking at 5-6 seconds. Okay, and then your acceleration setup is out to the 21. Again, you could put a 2-3 second time limit on it to try and really encourage the boys to go after the speed. You could pair them off, or you could have different ways of trying to encourage that competitiveness. Okay, and then a sample ball drill to encourage acceleration, deceleration, and then re-acceleration is starting at 21. You may have to cone out 5 meters. Okay, it's a race, so the coach is the star. He has the ball. The boys leave to 21, get around the cone as quickly as possible. The first person back to the coach will receive the ball. He'll become the attacker. Okay, will obviously take a shot on goal, and then the other player will become the defender. So the reward from getting around the cone and getting back on the ball first is that you become the attacker. Again, it's creating a bit of competitiveness, even more specific to the game. But again, they're getting what your session focus is, and acceleration. And when they turn the cone, depending on where they take their shot, opening up into max velocity. But again, you could move it out further to create bigger distance. Anything else you want to add on that, Paul?
Yeah, just on that, Max, on any of that work, the sprint work, the hardest part as being a coach in this scenario is abiding by the rest protocol. So 45 to 60 seconds rest per 10 meters. It's a famous saying, if you want to run fast, run fast. And the only way we can run fast is by getting full rest. So if we've any fatigue at all, we might be only operating at 90-95% of our max speed, and that won't have the adaptation effect to get us faster. So every run has to be maximum effort, maximum intensity, and you're going to find that the players are going to nearly be looking at you saying, "I'm ready to go. Come on, can we do it?" And that's the hardest part I'd find. Getting used to this stuff is having the ability or sticking to the protocol is quite difficult at the start.
There's a question here. Would you consider this max speed training an important component to learn running mechanics? Therefore, important to start at a very young age group?
Yeah. Well, for me, mechanics would be an important element of it from a young age. Teaching them just even how to coordinate, how to use their body, getting into positions that are sprinting, but it's quite a difficult concept to coach, so I wouldn't get overly hung over it unless you may have the luxury of obviously having experience in it yourself, or having an experience of an S&C coach there, or if you have a running coach on board, obviously he'd be able to touch, or she'd be able to touch. But for that, a younger age group, your focus would be primarily acceleration, more so than chasing up into max velocity. And if it is a younger age group, you probably do a lot of it through evasion games, kind of cat and mouse, stuff like that, kind of chase games more so than kind of structured mechanics, acceleration mechanics session. But as they get older, obviously get a wee bit more structured.
Yeah, I'd agree. And so often we find that we get bogged down in the mechanic drills of max velocity and acceleration work, and we don't actually just give the players enough exposure to actually just trying to perform as fast as they can. And we think about it, they are only running, like Joe, like the risk of injury should be quite low if they're being exposed to it regularly enough and they're well warmed up. We're still only asking them to run, and we're giving them a full rest. And if we look, they're often required to do this in a match, so they can hit max velocity or hit max acceleration in a match. So we need to make sure that they're primed and that they've been exposed to this regularly in training as a robustness or as an injury prevention effect as much as anything else as well. So definitely integrated into training. It'll have a huge impact on how fast players are, is what we're looking for as well.
Yeah, like one thing we would have used or would use is kind of for adult team or kind of 18s up, is kind of giving them a speed exposure of 90-95% of their max speed every 7 to 10 days. Okay, so you may have to do it in training, but if they hit it in the game, obviously if you have to look through your GPS to hit it, but you may then have to prescribe it into your training session if players aren't hitting it. We kind of use that in the traffic light system. If lads have hit a green if they've hit it, red if they haven't, and orange if they're in between. So it is important to get that exposure every 7 to 10 days, but that would be geared more towards adult players. Okay. So basically you're operating between 10 to 10 seconds max effort. Where you put this in pre-season and in season. Okay, so you can see an example there. Work for 6, player may go every 20 seconds, max effort, 6 to 10 reps, 2 to 4 sets. Okay, it is important with repeated sprint training that you do give them an element of speed. Okay, you're trying to develop speed before you're trying to endure it. Okay, so faster you get the player, and faster you can get the player, the better it is when you're trying to endure it or kind of build that capacity work. And then again, very simple session, out to the 45 as quickly as you can, 6 seconds, and they may go every 30 seconds. Okay, so the quicker to get there, the more rest to get, or you could keep it standard, just a 30 second rest.
What this is exposing the players to is that if we go back to the GPS picture, it's that time in the game when you have to do 2 and 3 high intensity sprints in a row in a short amount of time, and this is giving them that ability to be able to perform in this area of the game. Yep.
Yeah, and just kind of final area to look at, small-sided games. Okay, so again, there's a few papers out there, some recent papers out there from Mangan and from Casey. Okay, kind of measuring different pitch sizes and the demands on the game. So Mangan, in his 2019 paper, okay, he was showing that the physical and technical performance in Gaelic football is impacted by game size, players on the pitch, and the different restrictions that you may put on the game. Okay, but your physiological response through heart rate monitoring actually stayed the same throughout all 3 pitches. So whatever pitch size you have, they're still getting the physiological response. They're still improving conditioning wise. Okay, but the distance they may cover and the high speed running they'll hit will be greater on bigger pitches. Okay, so in their study they did a 80 by 20 pitch, a 60 by 20 pitch, and a 40 by 20 pitch. Okay, and then in the 2 larger pitches, their high speed running and their total distance was greater pitches, which probably from looking at it ourselves, we probably would know that. Okay, when the pitches get smaller, acceleration demand increases. Okay, decelerations, accelerations both increase when the pitch gets smaller. Obviously, there's a lot more stop-start and a lot more contacts, a lot of trying to get out of contact. Okay, when designing your games, it's probably something that we kind of have a kind of focus kind of maybe more on working the players hard instead of thinking of what effects it's having on our players' positions when we're looking at it for a conditioning aspect. So it is important to think about our positions. The larger pitch sizes are better suited to your midfielders and half forwards, where your smaller pitches are more suited to your full backs and half backs, which nearly makes sense to when you're looking at the GPS from earlier, Okay, a lot of high-speed running was accumulated by your middle eight players, where your kind of full back line, element of half-backs, full forward line or more, stop-start, lateral running, accelerating, decelerating. So it's important to give exposure to both, and we just don't hone in on just focusing solely on making the player work hard inside of their small-sided games. On the technical side of it, in our small-sided games, okay, we have more involvements compared to what you would find in a normal game, which makes sense considering less players, smaller pitch sizes. It's easier to get on the ball. Again, we need to focus in, think about what your game plan is going to be. If you're a hand passing team, if you're a kick passing team. If you're a kick passing team, you may want to open the pitch up so the player looks up to deliver his pass. If you're a hand passing team, you may keep it as smaller and to kind of work on that touch inside with players, applying pressure. Just a few considerations to think on small-sided games.
Yeah, and then the other thing in relation to small-sided games are brilliant, because you're getting the conditioning effect as well as improving technical ability, tactical decisions, team play. You can look on shape, or you can look on the type of way we want to play. I suppose just considerations to think about is the technical ability of the players might affect the intensity of the game. So if you have a poor technical team, they're dropping the ball a lot, or passes are going astray, we mightn't get them up to the intensity that we thought the game would require or would cause, based on the research. The other one that we have to be aware of is, are all the players covering the same distance, or are all the players getting into the same intensity zone? And we all know the player who's really skillful and effective, he'll look really good in the small-sided game, but if we had a GPS monitor on him, he kind of stayed in around the middle and played lovely balls all around the place, which is brilliant. And we want that player on our team, but we also need him to get his conditioning in. So if he's not going to do it in the small-sided game because he's too clever to waste his time running, we need to ensure that he still gets his conditioning, and there might be extra prescribed training or whatever is required to ensure that he's conditioned to the right effect. Or there could be a number of players in that regard as well.
Yeah, I'd second that as well. Sometimes you have the other side of it, where you'll have two players who play off two friends in the team, and they'll stand over on the side of the pitch and not really get involved and not move. So it is important that you do have your internet there to fall back on. If you have GPS, obviously you can give live feedback and call the players out if they're not hitting the targets that you may prescribe.
And if we don't have it, it's probably just a case of we get the blend right, that we probably do. We rely a certain amount on our small-sided games, and then we rely a certain amount on our intervals. So that's kind of the balance that we generally strike.
Yes, so as we've already said, okay, usually you want to go 1 to 5 minutes for your small-sided games. You may even go longer, okay. You're hoping your players will apply max effort throughout the season, pre-season, in-season. Considerations, your pitch dimensions, your player numbers, your rules. If it's a keep ball, if you have a floater, if the ball has to go wide before it can go forward, everyone has to cross the halfway line, whatever it may be. Again, your work to rest is similar to what we've been prescribing. Your demands are different depending on your pitch size. So high-speed running is going to be greater on a big pitch of 10v10, where your accelerations are going to be, or accelerations and decelerations are going to be a greater demand in your smaller games. Okay, next slide then is basically just a few examples of some small-sided games for some mechanical load. Okay, the grid on your left, okay, is a 5v5 with a +1. So the +1 is a floater. Okay, he plays with whoever has possession. You score through the gates. If you score, you keep the ball. Okay, so quite simple drill. A lot of contact. The defending team will have to work very hard to turn the ball over with a man down. Okay, the grid on your right. Okay, it's just a 5v5 with a cross. Before you can score in one goal, everyone has to cross the halfway line. So what you're doing here is probably bringing an element of high-speed running into the game, but you're also bringing an element of contact. Before they can attack, you may have to make sure everyone makes contact. But again, small grid, you're including just a small bit of high-speed running when everyone has to get across the halfway before you can score. You can keep ball, or you can give it to the opposition. But again, just two different simple variations of games for mechanical load. And then the next one then is basically a high-speed running drill. Okay, so if we're working left to right, you're scoring in the goals on your right where the red and green markers are. Okay, so 6 forwards, 6 defenders. Their focus may be on your attacking game plan. Okay, the yellow and grey dots is a keep ball. Okay, they've got to work it through either goals, the blue cones, and then they will attack into your forward play. Okay, so whatever may be lateral movement, or if you're playing with just 5 forwards, whatever your game plan is, okay, they got to play into it. Okay, so obviously they're on one side of the pitch, they got to sprint down to the other side of the pitch. Okay, if you want to punish turnovers, the minute there's a breakdown in play or the ball goes wide, the yellow and grey dots have to sprint all the way back up to where the stars are. So that's where the balls and coaches are. They have to get the ball back off the coach and work it back through the gate. So it's very, very demanding on the yellow and blues. But again, full pitch, game focus and high-speed running focus. If you wanted to put a variation into it, okay, you could just play it. If the defenders turn it over, they've got to attack and work it to where the coaches are and then sprint back to get back into position. Okay, so the main focus of this was high-speed running with a game plan. A lot of the times you would see just a simple forwards and backs 6v6 and the ball's just delivered in. Okay, so this is bringing greater demand, greater high-speed running, but also having a game plan element or emphasis on it as well. Okay, you can have it as punishing turnovers, or you can have it just your defenders breaking out, whichever way you decided to play it. But just a sample high-speed game focus drill.
And with this one particularly, it's just be conscious of rest between reps, or even have like the time go lower and more sets of it, and to keep the intensity high, like, and give feedback and the likes of that. Whereas if we go for 7 minutes of this game, by the end of it the lads are just completely fatigued and you're not getting the effect that you want out of it. So just lean on the rest, give them plenty of rest in between these games.
You want to take that pause second?
Yeah, so this next phase is kind of answering the questions about where does this fit in relation to the activity of the session and stuff. So we've given 2 examples of a session plan, and this is a pre-season session plan. So we'll be looking for in this the various sections, the focus of the section, what we'd be looking for in the content of it, and then finally the duration. So it's kind of giving a breakdown of what the session would look like. So we were saying a warm-up, a GA15 style warm-up, so that'd be integrated skills and resistance training activities to act as a robustness effect and injury preventative effect. Then this is where we'd put in our speed focus. So early in the session, the lads are warmed up, but they've no fatigue on them. This is where we build in the speed focus of the session. So this would be the acceleration phase in this session. So we'd look at we could add in a small bit of mechanics of the acceleration. So there could be wall drills or marching or any of those activities. A couple of sub-max accelerations to ensure that the players are feeling good. And then we build it up to max accelerations. The distance on these was 20 meters. We had a few cruises there at 40 meters as well. So they're just various examples of speed work. The next one then, we'd be building in a principles of play. So we're looking at kind of the style of play, what we want to do. So this game, it's a 5v5, 2 possession game in a diamond shape. So that's just given, this is where you build in your own kind of coaching protocol of what way you want your team to play. But you'd fit it into that phase here. That'd be your small sided game there. As we said, it's pre-season, and the emphasis for me in pre-season is really building the base. So in this model here, we're looking at a 4-minute run, and the target would be building up towards a 1.2 kilometers covered. Again, the 4 minutes is the most important part here, that all the players are running for the same duration. The target isn't 1.2k and you stop. Again, we play another principle play game. Another long interval run. Last one then will be a various different one, team play style game, and then last one will be a long conditioning run. We'd probably always hold off on the last run depending on how the team performed. If they were really fatigued, we'd keep that one back. And we sometimes, depending on the team you have, sometimes the threat of the last run brings up the quality of the rest of the session a lot. But that's very dependent on the dynamics of the team and how you know your players, whether to use it that way or not.
Well, so kind of where we have long intervals in here. You may have your short intervals if it's middle or end of pre-season. Okay, we just put in long intervals here, but you could put in your your short intervals or a different method of intervals. Yeah, Colin, if you want to check that.
Yeah, just I suppose you probably have it answered there, and I was just getting back to one of the questions. As an S&C coach, does your conditioning also have to be fine-tuned to the system of play where a certain coach wants his team to play a certain way? For example, most Kilcoo players get behind the ball when it's a turnover, so it's explosive speed. I think you've elaborated on that a bit, but do you want to go in a bit more detail? Or
Yeah, well, I suppose what you're kind of looking to do is kind of your general kind of conditioning is your speed and without the ball, and your conditioning without the ball. So to use the Kilcoo example, when they turn over the ball, it's explosive speed. So when they're breaking up or breaking forward, and when they're attacking after turning the ball over, they need to be able to tolerate the speed. Okay, so the speed examples, the general speed examples we have given would improve their speed. Okay, and then the conditioning or the aerobic element is obviously all the intervals and the games that we've applied. So the better your aerobic base is, the more you can replenish your speed energy source. So you're able to reproduce or repeat that speed element over and over again, as Kilcoo do. And then when you're applying it to your small-sided games, the example I used above, you may have more defenders in defence. So that example I gave, you may have 10 defenders against 6 forwards. Okay, when the defenders turn it over, they got to break and sprint forward to. Do you want to just go up to that column, and I can just kind of, it might be easier to explain. So here, yeah. So if the So if the Reds, are the defenders, there might be 10 red dots there. When they've turned the ball over, they've got to break out of defence and hit the coaches where the star is. So again, if you had enough numbers, they could play it into an attacking shape the far side. So again, they got to break forward out of the squares. So again, mimicking what to do with their own game plan. That explosive speed. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Paul.
Yeah, it is just in that regard that we're kind of going into what your own coaching principles are, and you build them into your games through your team play and your small-sided game style models. So that's kind of where you add in that bit of individuality. In relation to just from a science capacity, we need to build the base, so they need to do their long intervals so they have a base. Then we're going to increase their fitness by doing the short intervals, so they're going to be able to turn that kind of potential of the base into being fitter. And then the other side of it, we nearly treat speed, acceleration and max acceleration as a skill that we think they can get faster through learning how to move faster. So it's kind of touching all the sides of what Kilcoo are trying to apply, or a lot of teams are trying to apply there, that we want them to be able to perform high intensity activities regularly and sustain them throughout the match. All right. Take this one.
Yeah, so in season kind of still a similar kind of theme as your preseason layout. Again, you might have your speed focus to start. So you have your warm up GA15, and then you move into your speed focus. Okay, so your focus for this session may be agility. So you may look at 1v1 type work, or 2v2 attacker versus defender. So this is the attacker is running 30 meters from the baseline, but the 2 defenders are joining in halfway up to chase him down. Okay, and then the 4 players would leave the grid, and then the next 4 would go. Okay, so it's a speed focus. It's not a 2v2 tackle grid. It's where you're chasing down the attacker from different angles. So again, you're working on your game awareness of players coming in from different angles. You got to sidestep them and re-accelerate. Again, focusing on your principles of play. Okay, so you're fresh for your speed into your principles of play, which bring an element of conditioning. Okay, and then we're now going to focus on a repeated sprint effort. Okay, so it's only one set of 6 reps, quality work. Really tell the players to go 100% effort, 6 seconds, so out to the 45. Recovery going every 24 seconds, or you can go every 30. Again, then into your team play, which is in season. So your football is your most important aspect, especially in season. You're getting ready for your next game. You're trying to bed in your system of play and your game plan. Okay, and then you may finish with your repeated sprint at the end. Okay, Similarly, again, as Paul said, that you would judge on how your players are feeling or how demanding the team play drill was before, especially if you're going to look to repeat speed. But on the flip side, during games, they have to repeat speed at the end of games. So not a bad way to expose them to that. Yeah, next. Yes, Paul, you want to take this?
Yeah, drive on. Yeah, so that's the last phase was what's in the actual session, and this one is how it looks like in the week. So this is an in-season week. So the way we've set this week set up is we had a game each Sunday. So it's probably a league phase of the game. It could be a championship phase either. Probably won't be this year the way it's rolling at the moment, but we'll take it as a normal season. So what we're saying is they play the game. They're exposed to a game on the Sunday. Monday's going to be a rest day, a recovery day. So depending on the player, they might do a foam rolling or a swim session or something of that nature. And the Tuesday is going to be our high load day in training for the week. So we're getting in that training high load focus early in the week, so they're fresh and recovered for the Sunday, the next game coming up. So in that, we're putting in passive short intervals. So that could be your 15 on, 15 off, or it could be your tempos, or some activity that be in our short interval section that we had earlier on. And we'd also combine that with game-based training. So there we'd have our principles, our play, and our team play activity. So it'll be built out of that. And depending on how taxed the players were from the Sunday, we'd build in how many reps and sets that we need the players to have. And also, depending on how well you know the team and the fitness level or the injury history of some of the players, some players, although we might do 3 sets of intervals, some of the older players or players coming back from injury or have a history of injury, they might sit out the last set of reps or something like that. So we kind of treat a small bit of individuality if required. The Wednesday then we'd put in our strength focus session, so that'd be your gym session, and then the Thursday will be more of a speed element. So the speed sessions we described, and probably more tactical, so it wouldn't be as much of an focus on game-based training of conditioning in the games. It'd be more about shape and kick-outs or any of the activities we want that have a real tactical focus, that the team we're playing at the weekend play this way, so we want to work on this part of our game. We give them Friday and Saturday off, and then they'll be ready to go on Sunday. So.
And then pre-season, again, active long intervals, which are high training session on the Tuesday, which are game-based training, your style of play, your principles, whatever it may be. Wednesday would be your strength session, and then Thursday would be your game-based, exclusively just all football, whatever that kind of nearly banking on a lower activity or lower intensity activity. So your walkthroughs, some of your tactical plays, your set plays, so your game plan. Okay, so lower activity, lower intensity. Okay, Friday you may put in some non-weight bearing conditioning for players that may need extra work without putting any stress on the body. Saturday would be a rest, and then Sunday would be your speed or your repeated sprint training, as well as your football. Again, so you're focusing on developing that speed, and as pre-season goes on, going into your repeated speed focus. Again, from the question earlier, this probably be your time to play around with. Speed is very important. If you were to look to put in your MAS, you would probably, second MAS session of the week, you'd probably maybe drop it in on the Sunday, but it is important to always have that speed exposure, as we've touched on. But if you went Tuesday MAS, Thursday MAS, and then Sunday speed, you would create too much fatigue and may have issues down the line. But that's kind of how we would map out kind of your pre-season week. Anything add to that, Paul?
Yeah, just the non-weight bearing conditioning, the likes of putting a lad on a bike, getting his heart rate up to 120, 130, and just spinning there for 40 minutes is going to shift a fair bit of timber off lads who need to lose it without, and still making sure that they're able to perform and train on the pitch. So that's a good technique. And once they get used to it, they're surprised about how unfatiguing it is, really. So it's a nice one to use. And as he said, we're probably just emphasising really stress the Sunday, so they're going right from early on in the season. they're going to be used to Sunday as their game day. They're going to get up to a really high level. There's a really high load on a Sunday. So we kind of pitch that at that for the year, which works quite well. And kind of in this model as well, we're keeping the week schedule the same, which helps the players planning personal lives and all that kind of crack as well, which is handy as well.
And in season, I suppose, if the schedule is a Tuesday, Friday, it's just important to remember what intensity the Friday session is with the game on the Sunday. So if you're training on the Thursday night, you can go that wee bit higher. If you're on the Friday during your in-season, you'd have to be that wee bit lower. And then the final graph then is just a breakdown of kind of the methods that we would use. Okay, so your main focus of training is going to be your game-based football, and then we have a breakdown of the intervals that we have prescribed above. Anything you want to add on that, Paul?
No, it's just I suppose it's very evident from that we've put a lot of focus on game-based training, and we do want, like, we're playing football at the end of the day, so we want them to be very comfortable in the skills of the game, and the conditioning element is an add-on that they require. It shouldn't be we're not trying to win 5k races or anything like that. So keep football the focus.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. Kind of to describe the picture at the end, physical fitness is only one part of the jigsaw. Okay, I know we've only just described conditioning and speed and intervals, but as Paul just said, like, football is the most important aspect. Football wins and loses you games. Okay, so physical fitness is important, but it's only a small element, or it's only one part of the jigsaw. So it's always very, very important to remember that.
Just a question here, lads. You're touching on conditioning players for systems of play. Basically, what are your thoughts on, if you had the luxury of being able to have different conditioning programs for, your forwards, your wing backs, your midfielders? Would you see that in this question? It's your wing backs, midfielders, wing forwards, maybe more endurance, where you could have others doing more speed work, etc. What's your views?
Well, you could. If you have the luxury and you have the personnel to do it, you kind of your full-backs and full forward line, you probably would focus more on accelerations, decelerations, and an element of high speed. And then your middle eight, then you're focusing on your high speed running, max speed, and kind of covering greater distances. But as the examples in the small-sided games, you're hoping that by manoeuvring your pitch sizes and the numbers in your games, that you're incorporating that into the game. Or if you're doing agility grids, that it's working on defenders or forwards beating defenders, and kind of working on them agility movements that the half or the full back line and the full forward line would be covering. So yeah, you could gear towards more accels, decels for your full back line and your full forward line, and then more linear, high speed, max speed linear for your middle eight. But it is important that everybody gets that exposure to speed, as obviously it increases performance and has a huge effect on your acceleration and deceleration ability, but also your injury prevention side of things. So yeah, if you have the luxury of having the personnel, yeah, you could break it up into it. But
yeah, it probably, the main difference will be in that placing more attention on acceleration, deceleration, agility, change of direction for the inside lines. In relation to their aerobic conditioning or any of that side, what we found, or what we're kind of selling to you here, is that the aerobic side, or getting them fit and to be able to cover those longer runs earlier in the season, is actually just to be able to get them to recover as quick as possible so they can perform these high intensity activities as required in the match. And if we kind of pin our hat on it saying, well, they don't cover that much ground in the match, so we're not going to get them to do it. If they does unfold in the match that the ball gets stuck down their end and they're being really put to the pin of their collar and there's a lot of activity going on, kind of a worst case scenario situation we call it, they have to be able to deal with it. So they need to be conditioned to be able to deal with anything that can fall on them. So that would be the main difference I'd make changes to, if we had the luxury of it, would be give them a bit more acceleration, deceleration, change of direction work on the inside line, and a bit more max velocity work out around the middle of the pitch, kind of like Kieran would do. But good question.
Very good. Guys, just if there is any other questions, if you want to put them in the text box, in the chat box there. Just while we're waiting on that, I want to thank everyone for engaging with us tonight. With quite a large number on the call, and thank you for that. And look, it is difficult times that we're all in, but it is an opportunity for us to share and chat and maybe look at things we're doing. So in that, I want to thank the two lads. I want to thank Paul and Kieran for the work they put into the presentation tonight. It was very detailed, and they've gone into a lot of detail. So I want to acknowledge that and thank them for their work, lads. Thank you very much on behalf of everybody. With that said, I'm not sure if there doesn't seem to be too many questions coming in. We will have the recording, which we'll share. It'll be up on the YouTube. And for everyone registered, I'll actually send on an email now with the lads' presentation in a PDF format, because there's a nice bit of information in that I think it'll be worth looking back on. Just on behalf of Leinster GAA, we've just hosted the one sort of provincial one, because there's some good few webinars going on nationally on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, so they're continuing. And with our staff in the counties, there's actually, you've probably seen on social media, there's a huge amount of webinars taking place throughout the county. So if you keep an eye on our social media channel, in particular the Twitter account and Facebook, etc., we'll be advertising those webinars that are taking place throughout the province. And again, it's from guys of the caliber of Kieran and Paul that'll be delivering them. So we'll keep them on our social media and highlighting them, and we'll be running another provincial ones in about 3 weeks' time as well. So we'll advertise them. So for everyone on the call tonight, thank you very much for your time, patience, and hopefully you got as much out of it as I did listening to the lads. So thank you very much, and look after yourselves. Have a good night.
Thank you.